We'll go ahead and get started. Alan, you want to open us up with prayer?
Lord God, thou hast given me another day, a day to live in thy service for the good of my fellow men. I am indeed a poor tool in thy hand and deserving to be cast aside. Forgive me all my sins for Jesus' sake, and by thy grace grant me the fitness to work for thee this day. I beseech you to make me mindful, dear Lord, that I am a stranger in the pilgrimage of this present world. But God, fasten my heart and hope in the life that is in thee, and not my strivings and desire be directed to the treasures of thy love. As long as I am in the land of my pilgrimage, hold thou my hand, keep me from ever straying, and if I should stumble in sinful weakness, grant me repentance and faith. For Jesus' sake, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alan. Okay, so once again, we want to review our central affirmations. God creates creation and has a specific purpose for it. The relationship between God and creation develops through speaking and listening. God's word to creation is a sovereign call, but it's the kind of call which invites obedience rather than demanding allegiance. God loves creation, but creation refuses to let God be God. And the relationship between God and creation is marked by tension between God's purposes and creation's resistance to God's purposes. We're going to cover the material between essentially chapters 37 and 38. 37 deals with the dream of Joseph and how that interacted with his brothers. That sets up basically the whole narrative of Joseph. And then chapter 8 is kind of a chapter that is inserted into the narrative. It doesn't seem to have much relationship with the rest of the narrative, but we'll cover it briefly. So to set the stage, there's a couple scriptures I wanted us to look at. Would somebody look up Romans 8, 28 through 30? Okay, thank you. Now, Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. Okay. One of the things I wanted to touch base on as we're going in the book, touch base on it as well as Brueggemann, who is a scholar that provides much of the material for this particular Kerygma series, is to focus, and we see it stated clearly in the first one, the Romans passage, but we also see another version of it in Isaiah. And there's two words that that are important as we look at the story of Joseph. One word is is providence. And the other is predestination. Brueggemann talks about one being a hard, soft word and one being a harder word. The soft word providence, he means soft in a sense of it being more gentle. Where it means that God foresees for us and provides for us in the future. So we see that at the beginning of the Romans passage where for all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. That there's a sense from the beginning of the story of Joseph, the sense that God is providing, that God is setting the stage, or God is looking after, God has called Joseph and is setting the stage for future events. Later in the Romans passage, there's a sense of predestination. Now, predestination is a harder word because instead of providing for a future events, which says that we still have control, predestination is a harder word because the role of God is much more strict and direct. Basically, the idea of predestination, which was later developed in Calvinist thought, not necessarily Calvin himself, but Calvin's followers developed, especially the idea of predestination, that everything is predestined for us. That because God knows all things, is outside of and controls all things, then everything that we do has already been predestined. God has predestined us for it, which takes away all free will, right? What's the sense of us making choices if all the choices we make are predestined by God? Do we really have a choice? Which has been the basic argument against predestination. But how do we reconcile the fact that God knows what's going to happen to us and God intends a purpose for us? How do we reconcile those two ideas without a sense of predestination? A lot of it, according to Brueggemann, has to do with the difference between what God knows and what we know. And that's where that second passage comes in. My thoughts are not your thoughts. And because God's plans or God's purposes for us are hidden from us, it is still that's what gives us agency. Does that make sense? If we were already told ahead of time what's going to happen to us, then we have no agency. We just are expected to obey. But since we don't know, and we're not given a sight into the future, then our choices become more free. It's a kind of a deeper argument, but it makes to a certain stance. Now, how does this become important for us as we look at at Joseph? As we see in this opening chapter, where we're talking about the dreams, is that none of the characters in this opening passage know what's going to happen. Not Jacob, not Joseph, not the brothers. The dreams, but there is something that is foretelling the future. They just don't know that it is foretelling the future. Joseph's having this dream, but they don't know the meaning of the dream. The meaning and the purpose and the direction of the dream remains hidden. And it isn't until later that it becomes clearer to the people who are involved. So the actions of all the people within reacting to Joseph's dream, including Joseph, become the natural reactions that human beings would take. And it plays out in a natural way. But at the bottom of it, through the theme through all, is that God is present and God sees ahead and God is giving them clues ahead if they but pay attention. Does that make sense? So let's go ahead and get started into it. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, or Jacob, another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dream and his words. He had another dream and then told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Are the reactions of the brothers understandable? Yeah. I mean, how would you feel if your brother said, "I had a dream," essentially saying that you're obedient to me. I'm going to roll over you. Brothers might have a problem with that, especially since they were all older than him. What was Jacob's reaction to the second dream? He didn't hear the first dream. What was his second dream? What was his reaction to the second dream? He kept it in mind even though he rebuked his son. Yeah. His initial response was, "What are you talking about? Are you saying that we all are subservient to you?" But he was also smart enough. Jacob was also smart enough. And the reason why he kept it in mind is because of his own interaction with God, that one's journey with God is not always predictable. And that God works through people that you wouldn't expect. I mean, he was an example of that. But he was also canny enough and had enough experience that he didn't believe that he didn't know if he could believe that Joseph was called. So none of them, not Joseph or his brothers or his father, none of them understood the dream as a call. To Joseph, he just had an interesting dream, right? He was in no way there was not in his description of the dream, he wasn't saying, he didn't interpret the dream himself. He just said, "I had this dream." The brothers interpreted it, and the father interpreted it, but Joseph didn't. So all of them are approaching it in their own way, and none of them are seeing it necessarily as God's action. Jacob has his suspicions, but he still doesn't know. He just keeps it in his mind. Even he's not ready to interpret it yet. So what we're dealing with here is that God's call in this case is hidden. And this is a change that's going on in Joseph's stories as opposed to the narrative, as opposed to the previous narratives of Isaac or of Jacob or of Abraham. In each of those cases, God's calling is clear. It's not hidden. It's not hidden to the people. They may not necessarily feel comfortable with it, or they may not necessarily follow it, or they may not necessarily believe it at the time, but it's not kept hidden from them. But in this case, it's more subtle. It's more hidden. So we see what we see is a maturing of the understanding of the relationship between God and humankind. Is that the relationship is becoming more and more complex. One could also argue that what's going on is that as time goes on, the relationship between the communication between God and human beings is becoming a little bit harder to understand. It's becoming a little bit more blurred. God isn't speaking to Joseph in a dream like he spoke to Jacob in a dream. When Jacob has a dream, it's clear that he is having a vision of what God wants. But in Joseph's dream, it's not clear that that's what God intends. One could maybe read into it, but it's not as clear. This is probably what makes Joseph's story or the Joseph narrative more engaging to us, because Joseph becomes a character for us that we can more easily understand. Because the calling is less clear. And it is a little bit more complicated. And it does take interpretation. And it does take faith at a deeper level. And sometimes we don't see it. What we'll see in next week as we get to the later chapters, it takes Joseph a little while for him to understand his role, what God is calling from him. Which is natural, because in this chapter it sets a stage for his journey to be difficult. And the difficulty of that journey makes it even harder, makes the call from God even more hidden or harder to see. So what happens to Joseph? So there's a historical place and significance of Joseph is lost on the brother. So they have no sense, the brothers don't have any sense of Joseph's place in the history of Israel. They at this point don't understand, partly because they don't want to understand and don't want it to believe be true that Joseph is the chosen one, that Joseph is meant to carry on the lineage, that he does have a historical place. To them, he's just an annoying younger brother who seems to be favored and spoiled, and then has these dreams that are really irritating to them. All of which is understandable. We all know sibling rivalry. This is civil rivalry at its worst. So they don't have an understanding of the historical place and significance of Joseph's. And the family dynamics of sibling rivalry, a blended family where you have brothers coming from with different mothers, Leah and Rachel and their maids, and then the role of the father, who is somewhat standoffish with most of his children except for Joseph, and then later Benjamin, because they're by his favored wife. So what happens is that a dangerous triangle is created. It becomes too difficult to manage. It's a triangle that is set up between Jacob, the brothers, and Joseph. That triangle, that relationship between those three parties become too difficult to manage. It can't survive. Because the perceived or real prejudices that exist are too much to overcome. So now we get to the part of how the dream and the politics of the dream. Scene 1, Joseph as a dreamer is established, and it sets the stage for all that happens to him and to his family and even to the empires. The fact that he is a dreamer is going to have an effect not only on his family, but on the empire later on. It's going to affect the whole world that they know. His ability to dream. The fact that he is a dreamer. That is his calling in the beginning. That is what he's meant to do, that is his initial call to service or to faith, is that he is a dreamer. He's one of those gifted people that has dreams, that can dream the future, that isn't bound in the present, but can see the future through dreams. But it also sets the stage not for what is going to happen to him. Because he is called to that specific calling, and it's difficult for other people to understand or appreciate, he is put at odds. He is put in danger. First in danger by his brothers, but later on, what we'll see next week, is he's put in danger by his future boss, by the Pharaoh. His life is more complicated and more dangerous because he is a dreamer. What happens next, and that's scene one, is the dream. Him having the dream and sharing the dream. Then there's an interlude. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. He answered, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering the fields. The man asked him, What are you seeking? He said, I'm seeking my brothers. He said, Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? The man said, They have gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. This is an interlude where a man comes and enters into the story that really has nothing to do with the story except to be a director. Now, some would interpret this person being a messenger for God in some way so that he can direct him forward. But what Brueggemann would argue is that he's just a character in the story that just happens to be there. And so that provides the interlude. So Joseph went after his brother and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, Let us not take his life. Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him up out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So this is scene 2. The brothers take violence against Joseph because of the dream. They are still incensed by the dream and what they believe it represents. Because by the dream, regardless of the dream, Joseph is a threat. And in this, you have the role of two of the brothers, Reuben and Judah. Both of them kind of mediate or moderate the violence against Joseph. Where most of the brothers want to kill him, both Reuben and Judah take action so that he's not killed. Reuben tells them not to kill him because in his mind, in his own mind, he plans on rescuing him and letting him out of the pit. Judah also says don't kill him and offers instead to sell him. Both of them show a degree of compassion for Joseph, but it's a limited compassion. In many ways, it's a cowardly compassion. They do not take on the anger of the brothers. And probably they actually share the anger of the brothers. They just don't go as far as the other brothers want to. So their action is one of mediation, but it's also one of cowardice. They will not take on and resist the betrayal of Joseph. They go along with it. And they, by going along with it, are part of what are as culpable of what happens to Joseph as the rest of the brothers. Yes, they're part of saving his life, but the betrayal is still the betrayal, and for all they knew, they are sentencing Joseph to death anyway. Scene 3. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where can I turn?" Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, "This we have found. See now whether that is your son's robe or not." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father bewailed him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So, the third scene is that Jacob is thrown into mourning, into grief, and there's no consoling him. And what we see is a symbol of all this. The symbol at first, the symbol of the robe becomes symbolic. First, it is a symbol of love. The love that Jacob has for his favored son. And whether you believe that that love is proper or that it's unfair that he loved one more than the other, the gift was genuine. It was a gift of love. But because it was to Joseph and not to the brothers, it quickly became a symbol then of hate. It became a symbol for the brothers to hate Joseph. They already had a problem with him being perceived, and the coat itself becomes proof that Joseph is favored. And therefore justification in their eyes for their hate of Joseph. Because he is a favored one, and it's not fair, and he's being treated better than they are, and they're not being loved sufficiently. And all that goes in, and that causes this, not just jealousy, but a hatred of the brother. And the coat is a symbol of that. And that hate turns then into violence. And when the coat is torn apart, when they tear the coat apart, then it becomes a symbol of deception, of them tricking their father, of them deceiving their father, that into believing that his favored son is dead, has been killed. They're lying to their father. And so that symbol changes its purpose, its role in the story. The coat is no longer a symbol of love, no longer even just a symbol of hate, but a symbol of deception and what hate can lead to. All of this sets the stage for Joseph's life. None of what he encounters is his fault. But he is not self-aware enough. Also, he's not self-aware enough to be able to mitigate what's happening to him. He doesn't know not to share the dream to his brothers. That he doesn't realize that dream might cause his brothers to be angry at him. He is blissfully unaware of what's going on in the world around him. Part of it is because of his favored status. He doesn't have to be aware of other people because he is, in a certain way, pampered. That's the way he starts. The brothers are unaware of Joseph's role, and Jacob is unaware of Joseph's role. So the whole situation, this is what establishes that. What establishes the complexity of the story is that God does have purpose for Joseph, but all the people that come into Joseph's life, and including Joseph for the most part, for the most of the story, don't understand God's purposes. It's not clear. It's hidden. God is providing for them, but he's not providing the clue to them. God is calling them, but it is a subtle call. Any questions on this or comments?
Jacob must have really been blind to the fact that Joseph's brothers were so conniving and hateful to their brother. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he can...
fathom that a father wouldn't realize that.
Well, sometimes, we get blinded by our love for a particular person. Jacob wouldn't be the only parent who sees one child as doing no wrong, right?
But he kind of, played his brothers against Joseph.
Yeah. We get a sense that Jacob is almost an absentee father to the brothers of Joseph, that he just doesn't get them. And so, even in the action where he sends Joseph to check up on his brothers and report back,
Like he sent them to his death.
Well, even beyond that, he's saying, go check up on your brothers and tattle back to me if you find them doing anything wrong. He's setting Joseph up because he's blind of what's going on. Because all he can see is that his son Joseph is the apple of his eye. The brothers don't even matter. Which is somewhat understandable considering Jacob's own life. How did he treat his own brother? He cheated him. So, at the very least, we can say Jacob didn't have a clear sense of sibling relationships. So now we have another interesting chapter with a very odd story. Did any of you read this? Not exactly a comfortable story, is it? It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again she conceived and bore a son, who she named Onan. Yet again she bore a son, she named him Shelah. She was in Shiziv when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother." But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enim, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come in to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" He answered, "I will send you a kid from my flock." And he said, "Only if you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, "Where is the temple prostitute who was at Anem by the wayside?" But they said, "No prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Moreover, the townspeople said, "No prostitute has been here." Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, otherwise we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid, and you could not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of whoredom." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "It was the owner of these who made me pregnant." And she said, "Take note, please, who these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is no more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not lie with her again." When the time of the delivery came, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, "This one came out first." But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Which is kind of a pun, I guess. Therefore he is named Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. So what's the purpose of this story? It's one of the difficulties of this is that there seems to be no reason for the story to be inserted into the Joseph narrative. It serves no purpose for the rest of the narrative. More likely, its inclusion is a type of morality tale that was passed down, and they placed it in this because of the presence of Judah in the Joseph narrative. It probably came from a different source, but it was still considered authentic, so it's included. Brueggemann also argues that the narrative of Joseph was probably written in the time of Solomon's reign. And because during Solomon's reign there was an excess of and Solomon had excess, which itself probably led to the division of the division between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. All the wealth of the kingdom, of the United Kingdom, was basically amassed in the southern part of the kingdom where Solomon was. It was amassed through taxes and various other ways. And so the northern kingdom became bitter for that. And so Solomon's reign was seen one of wisdom and great power and amassing glory for the country of Israel. Israel became a much more powerful country in the eyes of the world. But it also became much more divided between the rich and the poor. And Solomon was seen not just as a wise king and a powerful king, but as a king of great excess and almost greed. And so that this story was a kind of a critique on the morality of the time. seen through the eyes of patriarchs. The role of Tamar. Tamar, like Dinah beforehand, and the women ahead of time, has no power in the story. The only power she has is the power of deception, deceiving her father-in-law so that she can then have a child and therefore have any status within the community. As long as she was unmarried and without children, she had no power. She had no say. She had no future, actually. All she could do is sit and wait and hope that Judah would provide a husband for her and have a child. The other man, the brother, the man that she was pledged to, and then his brother, both were wicked in the sight of God, and so they both betrayed her, and they did not consider her wishes one way or the other. They were selfish. They were only concerned in their own. Judah also was only concerned with his own life. She was not considered anything. The only thing that she could have, the only status that she could have in the end was the status that she had to win by deception. Not terribly different than her grandfather. Role of Judah. Judah does not come out well in this. His provision for Tamar is half-hearted at best. In the end, he is taught righteousness taught morality or righteousness by the deception of his daughter-in-law. So the radical critique of morality for those who pursue it, and the radical critique is this, is that what we see as a proper morality of traditions or the mores of the time may not be truly moral. What was considered to be moral in the time of Tamar is that the only value the woman has is that of bearing a child. This story points out that there's more to morality than that. And that the morality in this story is not carried by Tamar. It's carried, the immorality, the moral questions are carried by the men in the story, not by the woman in the story. That would be a radical point of view at that time. The realization by Judah becomes itself a radical notion, the fact that his daughter-in-law could teach him something about morality. Again, what was his first reaction when he found out that she was pregnant? Even though she was his daughter-in-law? Burn her. He isn't checked on that moral stance until he finds out that he was the one that impregnated her. Then he realizes that she's not at fault. It's only when he is implicated that he realizes that she might not be at fault. And so his understanding of what is moral and what is immoral is checked, is questioned, is radically brought into question. Strange story. And then probably the more famous character of the whole bit was Onan, because people referred to it, what he did. Back to the systematic theology, there's not really a cosmological question or eschatological question or even an epistemological question. Most of all, this story revolves around ethics. What is proper, what is understandable, what is not understandable. There are some epistemological questions in that, in questioning of what we can know and what we don't know about our calls and how God communicates with us. Sometimes God communicates us in a more subtle way than we understand. Critical themes are the providence of God and the hidden nature of God's providence. We believe in a God who provides for us, but sometimes that providence is hard for us to see. That's the story of Joseph so far. Any reactions? Any discomfort? Okay. Be prepared for a lot.